The Long Road by Wolfland. It was almost as if someone else lifted his hand and recalled Metagross to its ball. He couldn't have done it, not with the way the icy fingers of dread had closed around his neck. It had to have been somebody else that released Play-Doh on the battlefield, despite its type disadvantage. It wasn't his voice that foolishly commanded the defensive-minded Pokémon in an all-out attack. It wasn't his lips that curled into a snarl as the shocked Banette crumpled, unconscious, beneath his Pokémon's pinpoint extrasensory strike. It wasn't his eyes that watched Sableye drag Play-Doh into the shadows in retribution as it screeched in terror for him to help it. And it wasn't his hand that shook as his sixth and final Pokéball arced through the air. Things felt muffled and far away, like he was slowly being pulled further down a dark tunnel deep into the earth. As the shadows closed in at the edges of his vision, and the pinprick of light at the center of his vision seemed to grow fainter and fainter, an echoing chatter bounced off the walls that closed around him, and he jolted to attention. He could recognize that sound anywhere. The mouth of the tunnel grew wide again, and the shadows retreated as his eyes frantically searched for the familiar source of the sound. Beldum? Armaldo blinked at the odd question from its trainer and chattered nervously again, wondering why it was so hard to grab his attention in the heat of battle. But when Steven's response was a dazed stare and nothing more, Armaldo ran out of time to wait for a command, narrowly dodging a dark pulse that sizzled its way. Sableye hissed as Armaldo wheeled back around to face it head-on, eyes narrowed. It was a battle between them in the purest sense, the last ones left, and both combatants were currently trainerless. Armaldo's fins quivered momentarily, torn at the prospect of battling alone. Steven had always placed his utmost confidence in his Pokémon, even when Armaldo was just a small Anorith, and he had trained them to become strong and confident in themselves. Even if it felt better to battle with his trainer at his side, Armaldo knew Steven would believe in his ability to battle on his own. So, as Sableye bristled with impatience, Armaldo set his jaw with a determined grunt. His teammates were counting on him. Perhaps Sableye had picked up on Armaldo's momentary nervousness, because as the fossil Pokemon's resolve strengthened, Sableye's ever-present grin faltered a bit, and it took a hesitant step backward, no longer able to prey on its wavering emotions. The Stone Edge exploded from the ground right in front of Sableye, mere inches from delivering a critical hit. The Ghost Pokémon stumbled back from the glancing blow, and as it fell toward the ground, it vanished into the puddle of shadows still blanketing the battlefield. Armaldo had to resist the urge to look back and see if the impact of its opening attack had jarred its trainer back to the present. But with no sign of its opponent, it had to remain on guard. But the sea of shifting shadows would not give up its secrets, and Sableye slipped up from the darkness undetected, raking its claws across Armaldo's unprotected back. The armored Pokémon roared in pain, but with its back turned, it missed the way its trainer flinched at the cry. Without turning around, Armaldo released a blind Stone Edge where Sableye's strike had come from, forcing the ghost to leap backward away from the haphazardly thrown attack. The dodge proved to be successful, but Armaldo was ready. This time, it didn't give Sableye time to hide in the shadows. Before the ghost even touched down from its jump, Armaldo spun on its heel and sliced clean through the remnants of its Stone Edge with a powerful aerial ace. Stone chunks exploded out from the impact as Sableye was driven backward before its cries were muffled under a pile of rocky debris. But Armaldo wasn't paying attention to the fallen ghost. The force of its surprise attack had sent debris tumbling right at his trainer's box. Too far to shield Steven from impact, Armaldo did the only thing it could think of. Eyes wide and fins standing on end, it screeched as loud as it could. Steven jolted back to the present with a gasp and a shout of, "Armando!" just in time to register the imminent danger bearing down on him. Throwing a hand up to shield his face, he pivoted to the side as the largest boulder flew by, close enough to send his suit jacket dancing in the breeze. Somehow unscathed, Steven could only gape at the mixture of joy and relief on Armaldo's face. How long had the battle been ongoing without him even realizing? His heart was still hammering in his chest, and the more he blinked, the more he realized that the single icon beneath both his and Phoebe's name on the scoreboard wasn't just his imagination. He also realized that the shadow that reared up behind Armaldo wasn't his imagination either, and he pointed over his Pokemon's shoulder, finally finding his voice with a shout. "Look out!" Armaldo screeched as Sableye launched itself from a wave of shadows, Sucker Punch aimed at its snout. His partner staggered as the blow connected, but Steven caught the way Armaldo never took its eyes off its opponent, even as it grimaced in pain. Armaldo wasn't giving up, and neither would he. Ignoring the pounding in his head, Steven flung a hand forward. "Counter with Aerial Ace!" Obeying with a chattering cry, Armaldo's claws glowed bright with energy as it coiled low on its hind legs, transferring the force of Sableye's strike into a powerful push straight at the surprised ghost type. With a shriek, Sableye threw its hands out, conjuring a shadow substitute as a sacrificial barrier. Except, with its energy running low, the clone offered little resistance and easily tore to shreds under Armaldo's attack. But it had done its job, and the light of Armaldo's attack faded after it made contact with its initial target, even if the larger Pokémon still kept its momentum from its jump. Sneering, Sableye charged a Dark Pulse between its claws, ready to unleash it point-blank as Armaldo flew closer. But its grin faltered as Steven's voice rang out. "We're not done! X-Scissor!" The claws crossed by Armaldo in self-defense took on a green aura, and the growing light did little to hide the fierce glint in Armaldo's eyes. In a panic, Sableye threw its hands forward, teeth flashing as it opened its maw in a desperate scream. Both Pokemon's cries were drowned out as the attacks clashed in a mighty explosion. Lowering his hand from where he shielded his face, Steven's eyes were wide with shock. Armaldo was down on one knee, dark energy sizzling from its hide, and across from it stood Sableye, stock still, lifeless eyes somehow still staring straight ahead. There was no time to process his disbelief as a wave of dizziness overtook him, and as the floor lurched beneath his feet, he clamped a hand down against his head to stave off the nausea. But as he squinted through the throbbing pain in his temples, he nearly choked at what he saw. Armaldo suddenly began to lean to the side, and a sinking feeling knotted in Steven's gut. It must have been too exhausted from its first battle to withstand the punishment of another one. Phoebe's ghosts had toppled all 6 of his teammates, and the edges of his vision began to go dark as he watched Armaldo fall towards the ground. That was it. They had lost. Their journey was over. He braced himself for the sound of its collapse. But it never came. Instead, he jolted to a stop as a pair of hands grabbed him by the shoulders and tugged him upright until his back hit something solid and warm. "Whoa! Hang in there, trainer! Don't pass out on me now!" Iona's voice cut through the disorienting sensation, and for a moment he struggled in her grip, convinced he was now hearing things from another trick by Phoebe's ghosts. But as a second voice rang out, accompanied by a rush of air from the open chamber door behind him, Steven snapped back to his senses and let Iona gently steady him on his feet. "Phoebe!" Blinking away some of the haziness, he caught sight of the Ice-type elite striding across the battlefield, past where Armaldo stood tall, wearing a look of concern to where its trainer was slumped against Iona's chest. Glacia arrived at Phoebe's side and knelt down, roughly grabbing her shoulders and giving her a firm shake. "What?" Stephen mumbled, but Iona cut him off. "Take it easy. You almost hit the deck for a second there." She gave him a pat on the arm as he wobbled a bit in her grip. "But why?" Iona sighed. "I'm gonna have to let Glacia handle the full explanation. But for now, just know that you'll be right as rain once Frostlass here does her thing." The ghost type in question floated in front of him with a solemn look. Still thoroughly confused, Stephen made to ask another question, but before he could find the words, an icy sensation suddenly pierced through his chest, and he gasped in discomfort. "Sorry, this isn't fun. She'll try to be quick about it." "What?" The question died on his lips as he glanced down and saw that Frostlass had plunged her hand straight through his chest. She rummaged around for only a moment before withdrawing her hand. Clutched in her grasp was a writhing mass of wispy shadows, and he shivered as she pulled, dragging the rest of the captive shadows out in a long, dark strand. As the last tendril slid free, Stephen slumped back against Iona again. He felt immensely better, lighter, more alert, but at the same time thoroughly exhausted. By now, Armaldo had padded up to stand before him and lowered its head with a worried whine. I'm fine, Armaldo," he said, voice shaking, but finally not his knees. He straightened in Iona's grasp, and with a smile, the elite gave Stephen one last pat on the arm before stepping back. Thankfully, he managed to stay upright on his own, at least until Armaldo buried its head into Stephen's chest with such force it would have knocked him over if he hadn't embraced his Pokémon so fiercely. Trilling happily, Armaldo nuzzled into Stephen's grasp. "Congratulations, by the way," said Iona, beaming as she watched the pair. When Stephen turned to give her a shaky, albeit puzzled, look, she simply pointed to the scoreboard. The only icon left glowing sat proudly beneath his name. "You won,"